Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Sean Spicer, Head of Marketing over here at Agile IT. And today I'm joined by Conrad Agramont, who's going to be presenting the new cross-cloud collaboration features that Microsoft has provided between GCC High and commercial. This has been a major issue in terms of silos within companies, and I can tell by the number of registrants that this is a highly anticipated topic. We are going to be doing regular webinars coming up in the future. Next month, we'll be on migrating line of business applications into Azure and Azure Government. So I will be sending out a follow-up of this recording as well as a link to the next webinar once this is over. Thanks again for joining, and let's hand it over to Conrad.
Thanks, Sean. Again, this is Conrad Agramont, CEO at Agile IT. This is something that a lot of people have been asking for, waiting for. When it first came out, what we're going to focus on really is from GCC High to commercial, and I'll explain some ins and out of why you don't want to do it the other way. Even if you could do some of those things, where it might be a good option here and there, but we're not going to be very high level. Unlike doing it with a live demo, because in the past, some things take time. We're going to go through a bunch of screenshots, but I promise you it's going to be specific with some additional guidance. Hopefully you find the little funny text as we go through it. And then talking about the recommendations of how you should deploy it, what process you should have to go do it. And there's a new capability that's out there. A few places you'll start to see where, hey, that's a commercial, but not GCC High. We're not going to go through all those details. Right now, the focus is how can we get this to work and why. So for many of you who may not have worked with us, kind of found this webinar, wanted to participate, from Agile IT, we only focus on Microsoft Cloud Services. One of the things that's been great there is that it also does things on-prem, in the cloud. And now with this, where you can see, this kind of tenant-to-tenant cross relationship. You'll probably see in a few places where I might struggle with the word where I want to say, forest or transitive trust. For those of you that have done anything with local Active Directory, you'll probably think, is this the same thing? No, but kind of. But we'll build on that as we go through this. We're trying to make sure we have enough time at the end for some questions for what we can answer. Still very new, it's in preview, but willing to share everything we have. So let's start at the beginning. I think almost everybody here, maybe you haven't, understand that Azure Active Directory is the central point of identity when we look at whether it's in commercial or GCC High or GCC Moderate or DoD. There's always some Azure AD. Kind of feels like there was with local Active Directory, but let's not get those two things mixed up too much. But it can synchronize with local Active Directory. So this is great. All of our applications, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, get to do proxy applications, lots of great stuff. The challenge is once you're actually starting to look at the different tenancies. I think most of the people here around GCC High, so Government Community Cloud High, which aligns with FedRAMP High, where Microsoft is met that condition. And this, people are there for various reasons. The main ones, CUI, ITAR for sure, and many people are doing CMMC level 1, 2, 3. Some of this maybe a little outdated, but this is where you can do it. So you're in GCC High. You want to collaborate with somebody else that's in commercial. Could be your same company, but a different area. Could be a whole nother organization, partners, vendor. Beforehand, you couldn't do it because these were silos of tenants. So we say silos, there is what you call commercial, or it's also known as global. So that Azure Active Directory, when you're in this kind of commercial global space, it's really connecting everywhere. Hey, I want to go ahead and invite somebody from Google. This will work. I want to invite somebody who's in another Azure AD tenant, which I know it or not, and I'll explain how cross, collaboration can actually help with some of that as well. But those things just pretty much work. But when I went to GCC High, or if I'm going to GCC High, I hear that I can't share with other commercial. You could do it with another GCC High tenant, maybe. I'll explain that in a second. But the big thing was working with commercial to go do that. So we had these different silos, but we need it. There's different reasons why we want to do it. Again, two different organizations trying to work with one another. This is kind of this example a little bit. The names will be different, but you'll see the process as we go through it, and I'll explain that. But we want to be able to share things with one another, so that the business user too at gov, contoso.com, this over here, this user wants to be able to access a team site that's being created over there. right? For whatever reason, it's a partner. It is my other business, because we do a lot of things in government, but way more in commercial, or we're in the process of switching, whatever that is. This is the scenario we want to have. Unfortunately, until this new feature, the global we here, weren't able to do that. So this is what's exciting. I think that's why everybody's here, and we can go through it. So a couple things in terminology. You'll see this in here. I don't use a lot of the same terminology, but it's important, is that we are going to create a relationship between the tenants. If anybody here has been doing local Active Directory for a long time, they're going to see cross-forest, but no, it's cross-tenant. Is it the same? Like I said, no, because when we were doing those local AD things, there were like transitive trusts and different resources, and it was kind of an all or nothing here. We're here, we actually get a lot of very fine-grained control over it. Some things will show, other things I'll just kind of point you and go on the way. But we do have to set up a relationship from both sides, and I'll walk you through how to do each one of those pieces, things you're going to need, recommendations, what you should do during the process. And as you'll see as we go through the session here, where there's different checkpoints. And one thing you'll start to see in this is that there's, as we go through it, it's not a one button feature. It's a different process, and you should check all along. And I'm going to show you the exact same way to do that here as we go through. First off, a lot of people don't know this, but the old model, or what is also known as the current model, is when you have Azure AD Plan 1 or Plan 2. You could have gotten it because you had EMS E3, E5. You could have gotten it because you were doing Microsoft 365, E3, E5. However way you got that. If you had, and let's say you had 50 users with whatever combination licenses that effectively gave you 50 aggregated together, Plan 1 and Plan 2. But let's just focus on all the Plan 1s. If you have 50 of those, right, so that means you have 250 external identities that you get to control behavior with inside of Azure AD. What does that mean? You can do a guest, create a conditional access. Hey, any guest that comes in here, make sure they do MFA and those things, because they're getting that benefit, but you're not paying the license. The new model, which I don't know yet, probably another webinar in terms of them forcing it, but you can switch to it now if you wanted to. And what it is you get 50,000 monthly active users. So I believe these are external, like guests, external identities, things we're going to be using here. So if you have a lot of it, it's important to take a look at it. First 50,000 is this. After that, it's some super fraction of a percentage, but it's within a month of active users. So if you have 1,000 guest users, but like only 10 of them use it, it's going to be the 10. So, there's always a question: how is it licensed? What do I have to buy? Because this is a part of it when it comes to external identities. What's the right behavior? What's your license? Feel free to call us. Love to talk about licensing things. Okay, so let's get into the fun part. So our objective here, as we step through this, is we specifically want to get a GCC High user that's in a GCC High tenant, and we want that user to be able to access a Microsoft Teams team in the commercial tenant. So those are the things we want to do, and all along the way, we want to validate these current things. Like, can I even send a request from commercial to GCCI to say, hey, you can participate with me, right? That's important. Commercial saying, you can participate with me. I'm inviting you as a guest, but we still have to have a relationship with one another. Well, once we say that, yes, we can do a request. Can the user accept it? You would think it'd be the same thing, but you'd be wrong. Then the third part is, yes, we've accepted it. We're in there. Can I actually get to a team, the GCC High user, going into the team to go get it? So that's kind of our end goal. Again, lots of other features and capabilities in here. I'm going to touch on a few of them, but they're just way too much to go through it. So first off, when you're going to go do this, and by you, I mean whoever's really going to take action on this, one is know the roles. You'll see here I put security administrator as recommended, because as we do things like zero trust, try and do the lowest role possible. This is their documentation, says use this, and you can configure that. Now, who can do the invitation for the guest? Well, that's normally user administrator. So, but in terms of configuring this, one of the two roles you have, please don't go off and do global administrator unless you really, really want to. Second thing is this link is public. You don't have to log in. Put in your tenant name. So if it's mycompany.onmicrosoft.us, mycompany.onmicrosoft.com, because sometimes we had GCC user tenants that had .com, sometimes US, whatever it is, or the tenant ID, use this URL, plug it in, and you're going to see in your browser just this JSON complicated thing. Normally at the bottom is where you're going to see this text. I highlighted it. This is very important because If you have US Gov, it means your business to business is possible in your tenant. If it's not and it says USG, then it is not. So this is business to business for GCC High. This was happening a lot over the years when they did a lot of migrations, but your tenant may not have moved. What do? You're going to have to open a support ticket and request it, and they might say you have to wait or whatever it is. But it's a good place to look at, because if it does say USG, don't waste your time with anything else. It's not going to work. It's not supported. Take the next action. So hopefully this saves you a lot of time as you get going. So this is kind of the formats we're going to go through. We're going to step by step. A little bit of fun text here on the left. You can read it on your own. I'll just explain some of these things. So, let me actually go back to here, because one thing I want to highlight as we go through this, you're going to see the Azure portal, and you're going to see it in two different ways. You're going to see dark mode. This is just a setting that I've put in there so to make it a little easier to say, hey, if you see that it's in dark mode, it's the commercial tenant. Because we're going to see the exact same thing in GCC High. If that one's in light mode, we know we're in the GCC High tenant. I'm going to try and explain it as we go through it. But if I forget, this is how to reference it. I normally find that really good if I'm managing different tenants, to put a different color scheme or something different. So it gives me just a little visual cue. Okay. Right now we're in the commercial tenant, and we're in the dark mode screen. And, and by the way, as we go through this, I'm not going to go, click by click by click. If I did a demo like that, it's just a lot of wasted air, wasted time. So, there's a general assumption that you know how to get to Azure Active Directory. You understand that there's a setting here called external identities, and you can read the screen. It says cross-tenant access settings. We're on the same page. So now when you go in, when you first see it, you're going to see Microsoft Azure Government and Microsoft Azure China. It will be unchecked. So first step, check it. So now we'll check that, click save. It will give us a nice little, friendly thing and say that it's saved. Now I'm on the light mode. I'm over here in the government tenant, GCC High, attached to the government Azure Government, same thing. But one thing you notice here, which wouldn't you all expect it, China's not listed in here, but Microsoft Azure Commercial is. So now we're going to say, good, both sides, government, commercial, we both said we want to be able to do something. Now let's go through our first validation. Can we send a guest request from Azure and Commercial to GCC High? Hey, why didn't I show that screenshot? It's a basic thing. Go into user, create guest, send it. And I'm not going to go through those things that I assume you should know or somebody can tell you how to do it. Anyway, we send a guest, fails. It won't let you do it. Why is that? Well, we just configured it to say that we will accept it, but we haven't configured anything that says, who am I going to collaborate with? Well, that makes sense. We're just getting started. So let's go do that. Before we get started, there's some information you absolutely have to gather. If you're working with another company, so let's say in this example, it's not one IT person that's managing two tenants, but instead it's two IT people, two different tenants, and they're working on collaborating with one another. There's some information you're going to have to get from each other and share a little bit. Really simple. The best thing that I would tell you is copy the tenant ID in the primary domain of each side. So if you have yours and you ask for theirs, and you swap the information. Pretty simple. Hey, where are the certificate keys? Is there like a Azure Vault store for keys and registration and all that? No. You'll see as we go through this, very simple. But you'll see some other areas where you're saying, I do want to collaborate, but then we get to place rules on that collaboration. So again, you explicitly define it. You get some information from commercial. You get some information for government. I tell you to get both. When you go to the UI, it'll tell you you can do both, and I'll show you where one of those times it errors. You can fix it, but it's not there today in preview. So copy both of them. Here we're in the government light mode. Now we've collected it. Keeping track of your documentation for this is paramount, and I'm going to show you why. So now we're in the GCC High side. Who should go first? Doesn't matter. All right, it really doesn't matter. I just picked this way. So we want to add an organization. We want to add an organization, and here you'll see that we use the other organization's tenant ID. It says you can use the domain one, going from one to the other. You'll find sometimes that doesn't work. That's what's nice to have it in. I'll tell you the tenant ID always works, but if you're doing commercial to commercial, it does work. GCC High Commercial, the tenant ID is the best. So you put that in, and it says great success. We have added cross-tenant access settings, but for only one side. Now look at the table here. That's the ugly, messy GUID. How come it doesn't tell me something nice? I can't tell you why, except that it doesn't. So again, I really need to document these things now, because what if we have 5 or 10 of these things, different partners? We might even have test tenant. We might have something else. So who knows what is what? Documentation is key, so you can keep track of it. I think, do you think that would resolve it, make it more friendly? Gosh, I hope so. But it's not there down. Documentation is your friend, always, all the time. I'm a big believer of it. Okay, so now we've done this. We've gone in and said, hey, from GCC High Commercial, we set it up. It still failed. Still can't send anything. What does that mean? I said from GCC High to commercial. I said, I went and added the organization. Well, we haven't set up the other side yet, right? And this is why it's important. So when I say the validation here is that, and why I thought this was important, especially as we talked in this webinar, is that sometimes you may go through all the documentation and go, why is it not working? I always believe that if you go step by step and capture what's working, what's not working, and you'll see more of this as we go along, it'll help you identify where the actual hangup is. And this is kind of a reference for you. Okay, so now we need to tell commercial, you know what? I do also want to trust the GCC High one. Now look at this one. I put in, the domain name agileitgov.com, and I can't find this tenant because it's most likely, I'm not the developer. I'm just going to make some large swags. I worked at Microsoft for over 7 years, worked on product shipment. Code is developed by people. And right here it's saying, I can't find it because remember, this is the black mode. I'm on the commercial side, and I put a tenant name that belongs to something in GCC High. And I'm assuming that the APIs that runs this on the Azure commercial side doesn't have the access to snoop around for GCC High. That makes sense. It'd be nice if they said, hey, maybe this GCC High, but it's fine. So it doesn't work. You put in the tenant ID. You can see down here below, it worked. When I put it in, I just didn't show you another screenshot of that. So good. We have organized, first thing we did is we did the cloud settings. I want to go ahead and support both sides. One side is GCC High to support commercial. Commercial says I can support GCC High. Very good. Now, we went to organizations. We added one, and we have some organizations, on both sides. That worked. Good. So everything should go great. Look at us. We sent a request from commercial to GCC High, right? Because we want the GCC High users, and I'll talk more about why that model is, ideal. We want the commercial users, we want the GCC High users to be invited to come participate in our commercial tenant. So we submit that request. Good news. It said, hey, you're there. Go ahead and click on this link and let's get started, right? So this got sent to the GCC High user from the commercial tenant as a guest. But wait, the user goes in, clicks, logs in, provides its credentials, and it said, sorry, access is blocked. Frustrating. Got a user acceptance, but we kind of failed and stopped there because we really couldn't accept it. We got an invitation, but we didn't get it. For those of you like Seinfeld, it's like, you have a reservation to hold the card, but we don't have any cards. But that's like the most important part of the reservation. Anyway, the accepting in this case is the thing. So what did we do? If you look at explain, we turned on cross-tenant collaboration. Both sides worked out. We're pointing GCC High to commercial to GCC High. Those things are working, but now we have to be specific of who and what can they access, right? And I think if you look at a good zero trust type of approach, that's really how you should be. Who are the things that's there? How do I want them to access it? And then once they come in, I want to get even more granular of what, how, and where they want to access. So now I'm getting even more fine control to do this. Is this a headache? Not really. This is now you kind of learn this. You'll see how to go through a little quickly. But now we're in here. We're on the commercial side, dark mode. We see here in organizational settings, and I want to change that tenant restriction. And you'll notice here that all 3 of these areas say inherited from default. What is that? Well, if you went into this, I'm not going to cover that today. This has all the standard settings that inbound, outbound tenant restrictions would have. It's pretty restrictive in places, and definitely GCC High commercial. I can't remember if it has all those same properties. So be very careful what you want to do for default settings. Because again, I can add other tenants into this, even if I was commercial, controlling other commercial, different topic. But we're going to go and inherited from default because we actually want to make some changes there. So now we're in the tenant restriction of the one we configured. And look right here, you'll say default settings, blocking all users, also block all applications. The standard one, default, love it, zero trust. Absolutely the way it should be. Anybody that argues anything different, especially in GCC High, is completely just overlooking and neglecting what's going to happen there. This should be restrictive and then slowly open up. Now, I say that, and then in this part of the demo, I pretty much open up to everybody. But it's so I can show that's going on here, because those other steps or restrictions become a little more of a different webinar. But in here, you can see there's two settings. That little external applications one with the big red arrow going to it. It's kind of a little sleeper here. You just see this little blue line and like, hey, is that everything? So, from we saw in the default where it had block everything, I went to customize, allow access, and said allow Agile IT users in groups. So I want to essentially allow, everybody to apply to do these things, and you'll see in external applications. Again, this is a place where you can naturally understand, hey, I probably want to have a security group if anybody from another tenant coming inside to use my resources, and even the other way around. So you can provide more control. So here on the right-hand side, you can see where we did click on that little sneaky external applications and say, we're going to allow access to external applications for people in this tenant. All right, this tenant. So now they can access it. All right, so we take that task. User that's in GCC High, that was invited, that had a link, that before had that error, now clicked on it, and now they see this. Now they're going to see their user identity. This part that's happening is from the commercial side, right? Because here we were with our GCC High one, and over here we're on the commercial side. And so now it's going to go through it. Now there's a place where you can customize more for cross-tenant collaboration, where you might want to put rules that say, hey, when me here at on the commercial side, if I want to go ahead for this tenant, trust their MFA, because we trust each other, and I don't, when they come back my way, they've already MFA'd, they've authenticated there first, then they come to my tenant to access thing. Maybe I don't need them to MFA register again. Maybe I don't need to MFA challenge them again. I'm not saying that's the right way to go do it. It depends on you, but that's a place where you can have settings to control how that would be accessed. Here, I'm not getting any fancy with it. I'm just saying, yes, they come in, go do it just to, for this particular part of the webinar. So, because what happens after this, this box here is off we go to MFA and authenticator, phone numbers, those types of things. But, I'm shortcutting some of that. So now the user gets in. Success. The GCC High user was able to accept the invitation, and now they're an entity, a GCC High entity that's able to access, commercial items. But we still haven't completed, our goal here in our validation. So let's finish this up. So now we have from Microsoft Teams, some owner out there in the team says, you know what, hey, I know we sent this invitation with this other organization, could be our defense department that's over there, or maybe just whatever that might be. And now that they're invited and I can see them, I may want to actually make sure that they can come into the application. So once that happens, you can see that, hey, this person logged in and made submitted a message in Teams and on the web. Great success. So going through the scenario and validate, hopefully you understand that as you're going through these different settings, there needs to be a lot of discussion around, what is the right path there and back that we have? What level of data do we want to have? Hey, quick question. If we're doing GCC High things in the government side of it, and then we are, working in commercial, hey, does that mean that I can get a GCC High file that's in OneDrive or SharePoint or in Teams in the GCC High tenant? And now that I can access the other tenant, could I put it over there? I mean, could you? You could, but you can set other restrictions. That's for data loss prevention, information protection, automated those things, where you have to trust in the labeling, the rules you create in DLP, because they could have simply still put it on a USB drive. They could have simply done some other loose rules of permission. So, opening this up does provide another avenue to access things. But, really at that point, you should have already, if you're really concerned about that content, about what's going on, you would really want to make sure that that's locked up regardless of this. But now that you did open it up, do I really need everybody to go do that? So if we're going to collaborate with a partner or a vendor, and the person that does have access to specific CUI data, we say CUI, it's like, well, what is CUI? Well, ask your program officer. what specific items are CUI. They'll explain it. That's the guidance from the government, not, just passing it along, and then tag it accordingly so you know what it is. If you're doing those things, whether you were doing cross collaboration or not, you could have emailed it out, could have, opened it up to something else. So, but this does open the door a little bit more. So be cautious and test it as we go along. So one important thing is, much of my life. So, I worked on Microsoft Bridging System, hosted Exchange, hosted SharePoint, multi-tenant, directories has been a core part of my life for years. If you're going to have multiple tenants, then you have to think of it as multiple tenants, right? Not multi-tenant. The difference is multi-tenant is normally one tenant that you chop up inside. Multiple tenants means that I have two full tenants. Managing those can be a headache depending on how many you have, right? Because there are different security principles. It's really, if you're doing a lot of kind of click ops and manual operations, consistency is challenging. Automating things is key, but that's all often challenging. So if you're going to live a long life there, you really got to invest a lot in the people or the team that you hire. Like you were here, I'm slipping that out there. But if it's for a short period of time because of a migration or short projects, those are things you probably could survive, but still you'd want to make sure there's consistency across one or more tenants. And again, like I covered earlier, you really want to make sure that as you're opening the door for GCC High people to access commercial, you should be specific around which people. Right here, you can still open it up. You can create and say, well, I want this group or these groups of people. And it could be a dynamic group based on people's roles or whatever it is. It could be in a specific group. You can have a group approval process, all kinds of crazy stuff, so that you can do that. But that's something you should probably look at early on as you go through it. I think most people do kind of what I did. Hey, let's just wire it up and see it working. Okay, but make sure you're ready to delete that thing and start over, which is something I talk about, of automating. PowerShell is your friend. You can, just like in many places, you'll do it manually. I like it. Now you know your properties. Kill the manual configurations, both sides, redo it to PowerShell script, and because you're going to get a lot of management stuff out of it as well. So that's really, really key. Documentation is key. And there is already really good integration with Azure Log Analytics. So as long as you have Azure Active Directory, where it's the diagnostic settings are pushing to Log Analytics, and or Blob, there you can create a rule that says, hey, anytime there's a change in our cross-tenant collaboration, I want to send an email, text message, whatever notification to these people. And those people might say like, oh, we got a notification of things we knew we were doing. Cool. Oh, we got a notification of things that we didn't know somebody was changing. That's a problem. And so that's a really key thing, especially for those that are, many people going to GCC are there for ITAR, CMMC compliance. So this is a really key one. And again, in commercial, as you look at what you can do in commercial, you can think of, well, right now we have guests and people that we work with, but you might say, well, when we're working with this one specific vendor or partner, I may want to control it a little bit more. Let's say merger and acquisition. I don't want everybody to add these people in. I may want to keep it real tight. Who can see them? Who can participate? How they participate? I have another vendor that I work with, and I want to control their access to things. They have an Active Directory, but they're maybe I'm doing commercial, global, and they're maybe in a different country. I can't be for certain how they do their authentication, and I really only want to limit it to certain people in our organization, and even perhaps from theirs, to access our environment. So I can essentially take over that relationship with the tenant and say, I want it to be like this versus, or now commercial, anybody can invite any guest anywhere. Yes, you can scope that down, but we don't really scope down what organization. So these are more configurations you can have. You might say, well, why don't I just stop all that from now? Depending on the size of your organization, number of requests, that could be a nightmare. So there could be some balance. Anyhow, there's been a lot of really great innovations that's there. The side of it, well, can commercial work with GCC High? We've struggled with some of that. And then you start thinking, do I really want a commercial user to go inside of my tenant? There might be a reason, super risky, and something to take a look at. What did people do before this? How you'd create another account. So the nice thing about this is that if I did have those other partners, other people to come in, both sides, I don't have to buy additional licensing both sides. I can use the external relationship to go do it. I can set up rules and alerts. There's PowerShell commands, so you can see how many people have logged in through an external identity, what their properties are. So there's a lot of good stuff that's in log analytics that you can use. PowerShell has some really good commands that's there. Probably a topic for another day of how to really automate these things. So I know I power through some of these things, but no need to kind of overspend time on these areas. It actually leaves us with lots more time for additional questions. But those are the main things. Like I said, through this, there's screenshots, but I think they're pretty reusable in many ways. And like Sean said, he'll make this available. I think that, documentation is really key when you go through this, making that collaboration, how to make the decision if we're all in commercial now and we were deciding to go to GCC High, should we bring all of them? Again, you have to really look at the multiple tenant management. Some organizations have a tough time managing just one. Now managing two, keeping them consistent. What users go where? If they're going to have multiple accounts, it can be tricky. Not saying your scenario wouldn't justify some of it, but something to not just jump right into without some additional guide and expertise. And that's what here at Agile IT we're here to help. So with that, I thank you for your time. Let's ask them. We can open up to some questions. If there's anything in the question board or Sean House, we want to get questions.
Yeah, thank you, Conrad. We actually have a number of questions in the question board. So one that came in the middle here is, pardon me, the text box is small. If our organization is strictly GCC High and we want to collaborate with another firm who's commercial, are you saying that their administrator would need to configure their end a specific way in addition to us doing it on our end?
Correct. I don't like that answer as much as you don't, but you can see here where when you're GCC High, the rules are different. If GCC High was as open as commercial was, where any guest can come in, and there wasn't this level of restriction, those areas, especially if you're doing anything for CMMC or following NIST 171, and there's a part around being able to have a process and strict guidance in terms of access, you would break this 1,000 ways. Here you are being explicit. It's probably a headache if you're like, well, we have to do it for 10. Okay, if you go through the process here, it's really not that bad. A little coordination, like, hey, here's my settings. I put mine in. Did you do yours? Yeah, boom, boom, we're done. So the nice thing is you don't have to like transfer a lot of special keys or secrets, and you don't have and there isn't like a timing. Well, you got to do this, and then I do this, and this. Like, you can do all your part first. Wait for their end. They go, yeah, we did our part. Finish up the configuration, like sending the actual guest. I don't think it's as bad as you would think. But yes, that is the answer.
All right. Another question here. For teams that are the same company, DoD and commercial, is there a way yet to two-way share other things like the GAL?
That's a very different topic right there with GAL's thinking. To be honest, I haven't looked at the latest in terms of what the GALs can do. I think there was something that's come out around this, but I don't have a good answer for it at this time.
All right. I will follow up with email with you as the person who asked this question, and we will try to get an answer for you. Does this apply to collaborating with government entities in GCC High?
So the support for this, if you look at the documentation, is that the support is for GCC High and DoD. Didn't say anything about secret. So I would imagine it would work in the same way. So you can do between GCC High and GCC High. So if you have some other department, for whatever reason, they have a GCC High tenant, yeah, it's going to work. If they're in something higher than that, then I think they have it for DoD. It'll work specific for them, but they didn't mention the other ones. But they probably have to go through the same process. I'm sure that's going to be a fun one.
All right. Do you know if there are GCC High tenants that allow commercial tenants specifically for DoD?
Can you read that again?
Yeah. Do you know if there are GCC High tenants that allow commercial tenants specifically for DoD? I think we might need to stop the recording, not right now, and come back and actually have that as a conversation, because I'm not clear on the nature of that question. And we've got a couple others to work through. Okay. So another question. Can you elaborate on the downsides to inviting a guest from a commercial tenant into our GCC High tenant? if we were working with a contractor, for example, who has commercial hosting for their email and applications, it seems like a benefit to not pay additional costs for licensing them again.
Yeah, so I personally wasn't able to get the configuration side from the commercial user going into GCC High. And I was going through it, I kind of stopped and said, well, why would I really want to do this? And again, I could see scenarios like, hey, I have this contractor, we want to go do this. I have some ideas of some other architectural ways to work with that. But I just couldn't get it to work. But I think more of it is because you're going to say, well, it's our content where it's a marketing thing, or there's a supplier and there's some things that we want to share, we want to get them access to. I think if you're going to do that, obviously you really got to think about the access and permissions. It looks like the features are there, and it just maybe was just me or my timing to get some of that done. But it looks like you could do the same way. I would just be extremely cautious to allow a commercial user in your GCC High tenant, because now they're an identity in your tenant. Somebody can just add them to a team, right? They can add them like, oh, here's a CUI team. Like, let's just add that person. Ooh, I accidentally put the wrong Bobby, and now what happens? So you may want to have some other strict rules around, how they would get access. I think it's a bigger problem, but it's as good as I have for now.
All right. And what looks like, let's see, the last question in the questions queue right now. Can you change the inbound, outbound policies after you establish the B2B Microsoft Cloud collaboration, or does the connection have to be removed and then reconfigured?
So so in the first setting where we just, the third setting, first we both sides, we say, hey, we can do cloud or commercial, we can do government. Then the second one is, I'm going to add an organization. Once you have that organization that's there, and then that's the point when you can assign, what users can work externally, inbound, outbound, and the tenant restriction rules. You can go back and change that, as you need to. It doesn't get locked in at that point.
Great. All right. I'm going to give a moment here. If anybody has other questions, you can feel free to put those in the questions chat. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. It was an excellent turnout, and I felt this was very informative. I hope you felt the same. Tomorrow afternoon, I will be sending out an email with a link to the recording, both on our website as well as on YouTube, as well as next steps if you would like to have further questions answered. But for right now, I'm going to stop recording and open up the chat for elaboration on some of these questions. But thank you again, and we will see you next month for our webinar on migrating line of business applications to Azure and Azure Government.